Daniel 5, we find that he is a young king of Babylon. His name is Belshazzar. He was the grandson of King Nebuchadnezzar. And as a young child, see, many times you have to kind of look, when you look at this story, when you're studying the Bible, you want to even look behind the scenes, because recognize he was a child that grew up. And he had people that influenced his life. Now, who do you think one of the main characters that influenced his life? Of course, his father influenced his life. His father was Nebuchadnezzar, and we'll talk about him later. But who do you think his grandfather was who? King Nebuchadnezzar. So you can imagine that he's still alive, just like I used to tell my grandfather for years and years and years. I'm sure Belshazzar knew his grandfather. We find that it was true in Daniel chapter 5 later on. But you can imagine, I'm sure he heard the stories about his That was amazing. Remember who King Nebuchadnezzar is? He is the elite king of the world, elite king of everybody. Everybody knew Nebuchadnezzar, right? So now he's humbled. He had a conversion experience. So wouldn't he tell his grandson of his conversion experience? So he probably witnessed or was personally told about his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar, how he lived like an animal for 7 years, how he was humbled by God of heaven. He probably said, you can imagine that King Nebuchadnezzar had put him to the side from time to time like grandfathers do and say, hey, Belsy, the God of heaven, I'm going to tell you, young man, never forget, he is a true God and there is no other. All these idols in Babylon is not true. It ain't real. This is a figment of imagination of people's minds. They're false. So it had nothing to do with it, Belsy. Continued on to say, remember, I told you many times, God's going to set up his everlasting kingdom. So when I leave this place, understand what God is going to do. But Daddy, I thought he's going Granddad, I thought it was going to last forever. No. Our kingdom's not going to last forever. And I told you the dream, son. Remember, I told you so many times. You can imagine that Belshazzar heard the dreams, right? He heard about the dreams. Matter of fact, he probably was given a bedtime story about the dream, about the everlasting kingdom. Son, let me tell you about this. You gonna tell me again, Granddaddy? Tell me that story again about the statue with the head and the arms and breasts of silver and the belly and thighs of brass. Tell me that story again about the everlasting kingdom, that stone. I'll tell you again, son. And he told him that story again and again and again and again. Probably also taught him the story about the 3 Hebrew boys and Daniel. He probably knew Daniel. He's in the same. Daniel was an elite also. Everybody knew Daniel. Everybody knew Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So he had a pride to know them. But out of deep love, I could imagine his grandfather saying, son, never forget. You need to walk humbly before God. Remember what happened to me? Repent, be converted to his truth. This is real living, son. All that splendor, all the riches of Babylon cannot save you from death. Understand this, son. Belshazzar, I don't know if you know this, means Bel, which is a Babylonian god. It means Bel, protect the king. I can imagine Nebuchadnezzar said, I know that's your son. That's your name, son. It's to a false idol. Bel don't exist. The only one that can protect you, son, is God. The God of heaven, the real, true God of heaven. So Belshazzar heard these things from his grandfather. He's seen the examples and knew about the examples of Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So really he had no excuse, but there was some other element that was still in his life too. He had a father by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. And according to history, Nebuchadnezzar, even though Nebuchadnezzar was converted, but his son wasn't converted. And you find this in the British Museum. There's an excavated ancient stone carving of Nebuchadnezzar. And what is he doing? He's praying to the gods of the moon, the sun, and Venus. So you see the contrast. You see where Belshazzar knew the truth, but he was still around the idolatry with his own father. So he had a decision to make, which way to go, but still, because God still revealed the truth, does he have an excuse? See, God's going to reveal the truth to everybody. Sinner or righteousness. He had to choose. He had his own personal great controversy. And we find, according to historical records, eventually Belshazzar becomes king, but he co-reigned with his father. There was a co-reign. So in other words, Belshazzar was the second in charge. His father was the first in charge. And at the time, Belshazzar, when he came up to be king, it was already built. It was already fortified. It was already a superpower military. And everybody in Babylon was comfortable with it. So when King Belshazzar looked over the capital city of the kingdom of Babylon, what did he see? He saw a brick wall. He saw a brick wall that's 56 miles long, 300 feet high. You talking about some walls now, huh? What's his name? Trump wants to build a wall. They had a 300-foot high wall, 25 feet thick, with another wall, 75 feet between. It was so wide you had two chariots right on top of it. 250 towers. He's looking at all this that was 450 feet high. A wide and deep moat that encircled the city where people can't just easily get in. The Euphrates River ran right through the middle with ferry boats, half a mile long, bridges and drawbridges closed at night. It was a beautiful scenery, hanging gardens all over the place, the wonders of the world. Hydraulic pumps. You know they had some water, running water and stuff. Hydraulic pumps. 8 massive gates that led to the inner city. 100 brass gates. Streets paved with stone slab 3 feet square. A great tower called the Ziggurat. And 53 temples, including the great temple to Marduk. 180 altars to Ishtar, which is actually Easter. Ishtar, that's where it comes from. The golden image of Baal and the golden table weighing over 50,000 pounds of solid gold. This is what he saw in his kingdom. And he's like, it ain't that bad. It appeared that Babylon would never fall. Belshazzar, instead of trusting the reality of God, his truth that was demonstrated, he fed and held on to his what? His pride. The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh. When he still knew the truth, he still chose to be a sinneraholic. Why? It's intoxicating. Babylon was a great place. Now, what is the historical setting of Daniel 5? Let's look at that. What's the historical setting? So you kind of have an idea of Belshazzar. But what's the historical setting of Babylon in Daniel chapter 5? Now, you need to understand, now during this time period in Daniel 5, the kingdom of the Medes and Persians, they were conspiring to overthrow Babylon. Matter of fact, it was a campaign of two kingdoms, the Medes and the Persians. You had Darius, who was a king of the Medes, the uncle of Cyrus, who was a king of Persia. And they conspired to overthrow Babylon. In the past, they tried many times. They tried to overthrow Babylon, but they couldn't do it. It was too fortified. The military was too powerful. So when Cyrus surrounded Babylon and unsuccessfully conquered it in the past, guess what God was trying to tell Belshazzar? What was the God trying to do with Belshazzar? I'm trying to warn you, son. They tried to get in the past, but what does the prophecy say? It says that Babylon will fall. But Belshazzar ignored the warning. But don't you know, remember about 40 years before the destruction of Jerusalem? Y'all know that story, right? Remember that Jesus himself warned the people. He said that not one stone will be left upon another. But like Belshazzar, he told him, he gave him a warning. When you see the Romans surrounding the city, the abomination of desolation surrounding the city, understand that's a sign that God's people need to get out. So when they retreated, they got out. That was in 66 AD when the Romans surrounded the city. And then they withdrew. And then those who believed what God said, what did they do? They fled and went to the mountains. But those who didn't believe was a great majority. I don't believe that. It ain't going to happen. Matter of fact, when the army retreated, Israel went ahead and decimated the people and came back. We did it. Ain't nothing going to happen to us. But what happened 4 years later? They came again and destroyed the city. God was warning the people, but they didn't see it. Belshazzar was being warned, but he was blinded by his pride. But don't you know, King Cyrus, he didn't give up. He came back. This is the whole context of Daniel 5, so you can understand what's going on outside the city. Cyrus comes back. He don't give up. He came back with his army with greater determination. I'm going to bring Babylon down. They brought a greater army, surrounded the city of Babylon, hoping to find a weakness. We got to find a weakness somewhere, y'all. Belshazzar, don't you know he knew that? He knew they were back, but he said they didn't take it before, and they sure enough ain't going to take it now. He said, I thought there's no way Cyrus' army is going to take this place. It's just no way. It's well fortified. Walls, we got enough food in the place. They can surround us. They can be here. They'll die for hunger before we die of hunger. So they can stay out there all they want to. How that camping out there, y'all? So in the midst, you understand the backdrop here. So Cyrus is outside Babylon at this time in the setting of Daniel chapter 5, getting ready to looking for a weakness to overthrow Babylon. So what did Belshazzar do in response to Cyrus and the Persian army outside the city? Did he bring his generals together and said, man, we need to have a counteract this thing. We need to get them out of here. Did he put the plan, a counterattack to fight Cyrus' army off? This is how much sin will blind you. This is how much pride will blind you. You have the enemy outside the camp, just wanting to get in, doing all they can to get in. They came before and he's coming back. And he came with more this time. Instead of taking it down, we're finding a weakness. We're going to find a weakness. Daniel 5:1, what you find Belshazzar doing? Belshazzar the king made a great feast. Wait a minute, man, you should be getting your army together. You got the enemy outside the camp and you making a what? A feast to 1,000 of his lords and the great wine before the 1,000. He had thousands of people there from all around the city saying, y'all, see, the king was all supposed to be the general, right? But now he's saying, man, y'all don't worry about it. Everything's all right. We got it, y'all. All these things is gonna protect us. So let's have a party, y'all. Out of defiance of what's going on outside the city, he said, I'm gonna have a party instead. Ain't that crazy? But we do that today. The enemy has surrounded the city. We're living at the end of time. And people are partying instead, drinking on the wine of Babylon. He's partying instead of setting up a counterattack. He's spiritually blind. So we find here in verses, won't be able to read every single verse, but many of you know the story. In verses 2-4, he commands the party revelers to take the gold and the silver vessels that his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar took for the temple of Judah years ago. He said, take those vessels. But we know these vessels weren't regular vessels. These vessels were consecrated unto God for the services of God. Even though Nebuchadnezzar came and took them, you notice he stored them away. Because even Nebuchadnezzar knew then, man, you don't play with that. That's unto God. It is only for the service of God and nothing else. It is holy. It is sacred. Can't play with that. But Belshazzar said, boom, forget that. bring in the golden vessels that came from Judah. Bring them here. We're going to drink from them. It's not as if they didn't have any cups. This was a rebellion against God. He is defying God, saying, who is that God? There's no prophets going to happen. Babylon ain't going nowhere. I'm going to show y'all, everybody, bring in no golden cups. And then he had the audacity not only to bring them in, pour in the wine in those holy cups, mixing the holy and the profane. How you think God feel about that? Mixing the holy and profane, pouring it in, and then they're drinking. And then on top of that, he says, this is now unto the God of gold and silver and stone and wood. Woo-hoo, y'all. And they just bing, 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 bing. And everybody's sloppy drunk, blind and drunk spiritually. And actually physically too. And matter of fact, they were involved in a lot of lasciviousness at that time. What did God do as a result of King Belshazzar's open rebellion against him? Because that's what it's really all about. It's an open rebellion. In verse 5 and 6, in that same hour, came forth a man. In that same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the part and the hand that wrote. Now, I know that sounds, we read it many times, but come on now. Even now, we even read this text. If you saw a hand just appear out of nowhere and start writing on a wall, all of us would, some of us would flee, okay? But that's what happened. A hand comes out of nowhere and began to write on the wall. A bloodless hand began to write. And the king's countenance was changed. At first, you're like, woo-hoo, the God. Whoa, what is that? His thoughts changed. His thoughts troubled him. His joints in the loins were loosed. His knees began to smote one another. He's shaking now. What is this? Never seen anything like this. So in verses 7 and 9, Belshazzar didn't even know what to do. He didn't know what the cryptic message was. He's like, what is this? What's this mean? He had no idea. He said, man, if anybody could tell me, you can be the third man in charge of the kingdom. You be under me. So the sorcerer's like, I think I know it. No, I don't know what that means. His sorcerers, his soothsayers, his magicians, they all looked. Oh, I have no idea, man. Well, I don't know what that is. So was the party over, y'all? The party's over. There ain't nobody drinking. They're all in the frenzy now. Like, what? But in the meantime, what's going outside the city? In the meantime, what's Cyrus doing? Cyrus is making his move. He had found a weak spot, y'all, in Babylon's defense and was about to pounce. This is at the time to look at, well, what's that mean? What's that saying? He's outside the city. He said, I found a way. We're coming in. We're coming in. So you find here in verse 11 and 12, the queen of Babylon, her name is unknown, but the queen of Babylon, she came banqueting, could be the grandmother or whoever, but came in a banqueting hall and told King Belshazzar about Daniel. Said, you know Daniel. You already know who, try to pretend like, I don't know who Daniel is. He knew who Daniel was. Now this time Daniel's a lot older now. And he said he can show you what the meaning is. So we find that in verses 13 and 17, much older Daniel, he's brought into the king Belshazzar to interpret the meaning of the handwriting on the wall, like he did for his grandfather, King Nebuchadnezzar, years ago, about 50 years before that. Daniel told Belshazzar that he did not want to all. He's like, man, you keep your gifts because your kingdom's going down. But before that, he had a message for him. One message of warning was given to King Belshazzar before Daniel interpreted the handwriting on the wall. There's the same message that God has given to us today. O thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom of majesty and glory and honor. And for the majesty he gave him all the people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him, whom he was slew, and what he would keep alive, whom he would set up, whom he would put down. But when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, He was exposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beast, and dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen. And you can imagine Belshazzar's like, man, I remember that story. His body was wet with dew in heaven till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointed over it whomsoever he will. And thou, his son, grandson in particular, and thou, his son, O Belshazzar, has not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest, what it say, all this. You knew this, man. Like, oh man, you're right. But he has lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou, thy lords, and thy wives, and thy concubines have drunk wine in them, and thou hast praised the gods of silver, and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which seest not, nor hear, nor know. You know that's your grandfather told you. And the God in whose hand hath breath, and those are all thy ways, has not glorified God, has not glorified. Belshazzar is giving an opinion. But in the meantime, Cyrus, history reveals, when you see the fall of Babylon, you can actually find this in world history. History reveals that Cyrus and his army, they're still looking to exploit. They found a place to exploit Babylon's weakness. Cyrus the Persian and the Median army, because right between, in the middle of Babylon, ran the Euphrates River to supply water to the city. But they noticed that the iron bars, the brass bars at the entry points of this river going into the city, they noticed it was unlocked. Now, one thing I understand, the way Babylon, even if they had that unlocked, they had another double wall inside, walls inside that river area, walls on each side, and it had gates. So if a person got in through the river, they still couldn't get in the city. But they found, guess what? That was unlocked too. Why? Because the people were partying. Those in the military were partying, and they weren't paying attention. But God said, I have made a way. Babylon is going down. And Cyrus secretly got his army and began to go in the entry points into the city stealthily. Matter of fact, before he went in, they diverted the river Euphrates so the army can go in the dry bed, and go through those gates where they left those iron bars open. It was ready. They were ready to pounce. But Belshazzar did not fall down in repentance to God. See, at that time, all those things that's been taught to him came back. And God was pleading with him and pleading with him and pleading with him. But he rejected it. He still remained a sinneraholic. What was the interpretation of the handwriting on the wall that Daniel gave Belshazzar? He pleaded with them. Daniel 5:25 and 28. And this is the writing that is written, many tekel upharsin. This is an interpretation of the thing. You ready for this? Belshazzar, many. God has numbered thy kingdom and is finished. Tekel, thou art weighed in the balances. You're weighed in the scale, and you're found wanting. You're deficient. That's what the word wanting means. You're deficient or lacking. Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. What does Belshazzar do? What does he do? Did he get it? Did he get the message? God told him he weighed in the balance. God told Belshazzar, your character, it does not equal to the character of Christ, of God. He's found wanting. You're deficient. He rejected repentance. He continued to stay in sin, pride, and lust. He remained a sinneraholic. In other words, he was told he was lost. What happened? that same night as a handwriting is on the wall. God is telling those who are still in Sinneraholic, if they're still Sinneraholic, he said, remember the wall. Remember the wall. Don't forget the handwriting on the wall. Because what happened? Was to say in verse 30 and 31, in that night, Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Remember, that's the uncle of Cyrus. Cyrus, a leading general in the army for the Medes. So we see here Babylon was overthrown as God prophesied. Did God say it's going to happen? And did you even know before Cyrus was even born, God revealed that he would conquer Babylon? And he said in the matter, he'll do it too. Let's go to that real quick. I'm just showing you again, as we end out, God means what he says. He already told him, he says, Cyrus. Before he was born, he says, Cyrus, just like he told Josiah, just like he's talking about Josiah, years before Josiah was born, he said, Josiah, he's going to come and burn these false prophets' bones upon his altar. He's saying Cyrus is going to come and overcome the Babylon. What does it say? Isaiah 45, verse 1 and 2. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden to subdue nations before him. I will loose the loins of the kings, to open before him 2 leaved gates. He opened up the gates for him. So who actually opened them gates for him? God did. And the gates shall not be shut. Now he's telling you how he's going to conquer Babylon before he did it. And then he calls out the name. I will go before thee and make thee a crooked place straight. I will break into pieces the gates of brass and cut sunder the bars of iron. I mean, come on, that should make chills up your. God tells them years before this happens, it happened. Exactly like God said. Remember who is in control. God means what he says. He swears it to himself. Jesus says, I will come again. Are you ready? When your character is weighed on that spiritual scale, will it say sinneraholic or will it say righteous? Is it equal to the character of God? Again, God is telling those who are still stuck in sin,